I kind of feel like first-round quarterback picks fall into three categories. The first is the most ideal. You got yourself a star. Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. You got yourself a star, and in most cases, you can identify it even if they're not playing. Mahomes. Even if they've got, some growth needed. Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. So that's ideal. We know who those guys are. Trevor Lawrence, bad first year. You knew he was a star. The second one is he's not going to be a franchise quarterback for us, but can we salvage the first round pick? Show him off. The third is we got to miss. So I think Trey Lance and Zach Wilson are both in category 2. I don't think Trey Lance will ever be the starting quarterback answer for the Niners, nor will Zach Wilson ever be the starting quarterback answer for the Jets. I think Aaron's around for 2 or 3 years. I think they're both in the salvage stage and the show-off stage. If I was the Niners, I would play Trey Lance a ton in the preseason, and I would set him up for success. I'd use a couple of starting offensive linemen, use some of your starters briefly or top backups, make him look good, get a 4th-round pick. I've been watching this league forever, so have you. There's always 7 teams, 6 teams, 8 teams at the bottom that by the trade deadline can use a quarterback, especially a young one. I think Zach Wilson's in the same spot. He'll never be the franchise quarterback. Size, style, lack of self-awareness. He's got what Lance doesn't, a world-class arm. But I think Trey's probably a more mature guy. So if I was the Jets, I would play Zach Wilson every available snap. I think Zach Wilson has the talent and the arm. It fooled Joe Douglas and many others. Somebody will give him a run. Especially a team at the trade deadline maybe that's off to like a 3-3 start. And they're looking at it thinking, listen, we the GM and the coach may get fired if they don't make the playoffs. You find a team that says, we got to go for it. I think it's very possible you could move Zach Wilson at the trade deadline. He's had moments and games that have been impressive. Trey Lance really necessarily hasn't, so I think you have to take a flyer on him. But Trey's a good guy, quick learner, big body, moves well. Salvage him. So I think for Trey Lance and Zach Wilson, I thought last year's biggest story in the preseason at quarterback was Kenny Pickett. And by the end of the year, I was impressed with Kenny Pickett. I think Trey Lance and Zach Wilson, I'm interested to watch their preseasons. Sean McVay changed preseason for the best or worst, depending on how you look at it. Nobody plays their stars. Nobody plays their starters. But I think Trey Lance and Zach Wilson are really interesting stories. Maybe not traded now, but they're in the salvage stage. Somebody's going to probably, by the trade deadline, a 3-3 team, loses a starter. I could see somebody rolling the dice. I mean, let's be honest. If you've quarterbacked with Kyle Shanahan, a lot of people will say, man, you bring all that intellectual offensive capital to our franchise. You could sell that. You could sell that to a coach. All right, let's bring in John Middlekauff, 3 and out.
Colin, pads are a-popping. Football is kind of unofficially here, preseason games, but week 1, we're almost a month away from that Thursday night doozy of Dan Campbell versus Andy Reid.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be Dan Campbell. Andy's been the best September coach in football. I thought there was something interesting. So Andy, all offseason, has been saying, we're going to put more on Patrick Mahomes' plate. Okay? We're going to put more on his plate. The Chargers get Kellen Moore. Inside the building, the feeling is with Lombardi, they weren't giving him enough on his plate. Kellen Moore is going to put more on his plate. I read a quote today about Dak Prescott where they're trying to make the Cowboy offense Dak-friendly, take more off his plate. And my takeaway on that, John, you were a scout in this league, is timeout. The great ones, the Mannings, the Mahomes, you just keep throwing layers of stuff at him. Dak, they're pulling stuff off the table. I hate the sound of that. So Schottenheimer's a conservative OC. Mike tends to be a conservative OC, 7-12-1 in his last 20 games play calling. That was one of those, doesn't sound like much. Didn't love the comment by Dallas.
I would say this, Colin. Just because you pay a guy a premium doesn't mean he's a premium player. And once Dak got that $40 million a year contract, didn't change his limitations. I would, though, the last 2 years, the Cowboys have lost right in 2 years ago in the first round and this year in the second round to the 49ers. And I think they started seeing themselves. We're a defensive team because we could hang with their physicality. And last year they did. They went blow for blow. It was like two Mike Tysons hitting each other. It was the most physical game of the playoffs. But they lost because Dak did what Kyle Shanahan never allows his quarterback to do, for the most part, is ruin the game. He threw the picks. So you always had the stat when Zeke, before he fell off a cliff, was like, run the ball. Don't get too pass happy with Dak. That's when he, kind of turns into more of an average quarterback. If you can keep him probably in the high 20s attempts, you got a chance, especially with how good their defense is. And I would say that their defensive coordinator has turned in right there with Vic Fangio, right? And just their defensive personnel as one of the betters in the league. So they can play a game that most teams can't because most teams don't have very good defenses. So if you don't turn the ball over, I think I'm going to pick the Cowboys to win the division. And not because I think Dak Prescott is better than Jalen. I just think they have, they kind of know who they are. For the first time in a long time with the Cowboys, they're always kind of fighting one side of the other, and they don't have a clear identity. I think they do have an identity now. And if that, to me, it just comes down to Dak Prescott not turning the ball over. Because if he doesn't turn the ball over against the 49ers lose that game.
Well, there's a number, I don't have it in front of me, with Dak Prescott. He wins almost 80% of his starts when he doesn't have a turnover, which is not abnormal for many quarterbacks. But what happens when he has just one or more? He wins like 30% of his games.
Yeah.
Is that it's like LeBron James. LeBron James could have a bad shooting night and still be the most impactful player on the floor because he does so many things well. Dak's not talented enough to overcome a turnover. He's just not. No. Brady has won Super Bowls with pick sixes. All right. Yeah. Both Mannings have had high interception years. Favre, huge interception years, and they win the division. Dak, the margins are tight. It's a little Mac Jones. It's a little Kirk Cousins.
For sure.
Turnover brings down the win total.
Well, it's where Matt Stafford is, I think, sometimes talked about, not in that top 5-6, but in that next crew of guys. His physical attributes and talent is far superior from kind of that group, right? He's going to turn the ball over, but at any moment he can throw 4 touchdowns in a half. He can stretch the field in one play, throw the ball, 40, 50 plus yards with his eyes closed. It's why you remember a couple years ago when the Warriors, I think they won 15 games. Steph got hurt. Clay got hurt. Kevin had just left, and they just fell apart. I know, you're down in LA, you're close to the Rams. Cooper Kupp already injured. They are very dependent on like 3 guys. And if those 3 guys are healthy, they can be competitive because they got a really good coach. I think the Rams have a better chance of competing for Caleb Williams than they do a playoff spot. I think they're going to be really bad because I just think it's inevitable. Their players are a little older now. Stafford with the elbow. How often, we see it all the time in baseball players. Once the elbow starts getting messed up, it kind of goes. We saw it in Roethlisberger. The elbow, never the same. So Cooper Kupp now, injured last year, injured again now. Aaron Donald, all-time great player, but he can only do so much. We've seen great defensive players on shitty teams. I mean, J.J. Watt's been a great player on bad. You can't. This isn't the NBA. So to me, the Rams, their margin for error is so thin just with the depth of their team. And we're already seeing the injuries happen. And last year it happened, and they were god-awful. They just happened to not have their pick. I don't see why they – think about the division. We know Seattle's going to be really competitive. Obviously, the 49ers are good. Even if Arizona stinks, they play the NFC East, so you get 3 playoff teams, and Washington's feisty, and they play the AFC North. So you're getting the Steelers, the Ravens. I mean, the Browns, even if they're not a playoff team, have a lot of talent. And then obviously what team? The Bengals. So, I mean, you just got a really, really good that's a tough schedule.
So I came out and said I had a very good source, so did Jason McIntyre, that we heard the Rams tried to restructure the Matt Stafford contract. I was shocked when a member of the executive team for the Rams came out and made a point of a LA Times article saying, this is not true. These reporting, taking a shot at me. 2 days later, Matt Stafford announces, yeah, we tried to restructure my deal in the offseason. The Rams are trying to fool us. They had discussions. They wanted to restructure the deal. They couldn't and had to move off people. They like Matt, but Bucky Brooks told me yesterday, and I've heard this, if Matt gets banged up, they're drafting a quarterback with the first pick. They know how good this draft is. They look 3 years ahead of time, and the feeling is this is the best draft in a 4-year window, the best quarterback draft next year. Yeah. Last year wasn't good. The following year after is not great. So you get about 2 great quarterback drafts every decade, like 4 first-round guys. Next year is that draft. So, and there's a belief, even if Stafford plays pretty well, and they're like a 7-8 win team, there'll be 4 guys. They'll be able to get a Quinn Ewers, a Michael Penix Jr. at like 12 or 13 or 15 in the draft. So I think the Rams, if you go like and look at Kansas City last year, they had a star offensive coach, a star quarterback, a good enough O-line, 1-star weapon, great defensive player, good linebacker, and kids everywhere. That's a little Rams-ish. Ernest Jones, Aaron Donald, Cooper Kupp, Matt Stafford. The difference is, and McVay, is that the Chiefs players are all in their prime. And to your point, the Rams star players are all coming off injuries. So I do think their margins are thin. I'm just fascinated to watch Matt Stafford because he took a lot of hits in Detroit. He just rented a gorgeous house on the beach in Los Angeles. And the feeling is, last year or two in LA, he wants to have some fun. He knows it's not going to last forever. Sometimes it's unfair, right? When a social clip comes out of your show, I didn't see the whole take, but you nailed the Baker Mayfield thing from the start. You had a take. He's a part of probably the most irrelevant quarterback competition in the history of the league right now in Tampa. I mean, absolutely no one cares. And I think you came out and said, he should retire because he's got, he's head right to college football and be a star. I think that's kind of crazy just because he's making $4 million. He wouldn't make $4 million right away on TV. And he's got a chance if he can do this for a couple more years. But clearly he's headed toward, and overall, and think about college football, I never saw Kirk Herbstreit throw a pass. I don't remember a Klatt pass. And Matt Leinart, who I think is really good, obviously had a very, very, underwhelming NFL career, right, for his college status. I think but clearly Baker's career is headed nowhere fast. And this Tampa team, I mean, they're definitely circling the Caleb wagons, right? I mean, they want a big part of that. I guess there's twofold. Were you being dead serious on that, the retirement? And 2, have you ever nailed the take harder than, because I think the Johnny Manziel, a lot of people, Baker was a guy, number 1 overall. And I was wrong because I thought it really taught me over the last couple of years. I thought he could be Drew Brees. Well, a huge part of Drew Brees was the character and the intangibles. And look at all the star quarterbacks now. The intangibles have to be off the charts, even for the average guys, let alone the stars. Yeah. Well, first of all, NFL scouts liked Sam Darnold too. So I missed on Darnold. I think Johnny Manziel I nailed, Baker I nailed. I didn't like Zach Wilson at all. I said he was going to be a bust. So, but I liked Sam Darnold. And I still think if Darnold got competent coaching and started in San Francisco, he could be a playoff quarterback. But he does have a slower delivery. And he tends to be a hero ball quarterback. He was at USC, and he's not that athletic. He's athletic. He's not Josh. He's like a poor man's Josh Allen athletically. He's big, strong. He's not that big and strong. I was being serious. My takeaway is there are people that aren't built to be backups. Cam Newton, Baker Mayfield, Tim Tebow. They're too big. Too many commercials. They're too big. You want Colt McCoy. You want Tyrod Taylor. Baker is too big to be a backup. So if he loses to Kyle Trask, he's still got a chip on his shoulder a mile long. Last week, he was quoted saying in front of a camera, I don't need anybody to tell me how to play quarterback. It's who he is. Yeah. So he's too big of a personality, too much edge to be a backup. right? I always said a backup quarterback should be able to put a baseball hat on in a mall and dark sunglasses and be unnoticeable. Colt McCoy, melt. Tebow can't do that. Cam can't do that. And Baker can't do that. Secondly, he's making $4 million a year, but to be a top analyst at a football network, you'd make about 2.5. And the truth is, you don't want to become a punchline. And if Baker plays for 2 or 3 more years, and this year goes, starts and goes 1-8 and gets hurt. And by the way, he's led the NFL in interceptions since he entered the league, 2-8 last year. If he went 0-6 this year, and that means he went 2-14 in his last 16 NFL starts, he becomes a complete, utter punchline. Sam Darnold failed. Baker failed. They're not punchlines. Like, people still like Sam, and Baker got to a playoff. So my takeaway is protect your brand. Also, money's not that big for him because he took every available penny with all those insurance commercials. So if I was his agent, I'd be like, dude, if you lose the job to Kyle Trask, they're trying to lose privately in Tampa. You get to 1-5, John, they're moving pieces at the trade deadline. They've got players.
Yeah, they do.
Now, Arizona may not do that because if Kyler Murray comes back in week 6, they don't want to bail on him and get him hurt, right? They don't want him to get hurt because even if they were moving off him, hard to trade him if he's injury plagued. If they lose their first 4 in Tampa, I mean, that front office, they're playing Trask. Baker couldn't beat out Trask. They're moving pieces. Guys can get hurt. So I'm dead serious. I would say if you can't beat out Kyle, I'd retire. I'd call the networks, take a year off, practice, go to these companies, say, I want to get good at this, and go be a rock star.
I'm in agreement on the backup quarterback. You get too famous. I also think that happens sometimes when you're a former really, really high pick in a short period of time, right? Zach Wilson would fall under that, but Aaron is such a star. He's already irrelevant. No one cares. That's where Trey Lance is kind of interesting, right? Because you got Brock Purdy, who was Mr. Relevant, and even Sam Darnold's making $3 million. Well, Brock Purdy's the starter. And I'm a big believer, and they still got a lot of camp left. They got some joint practices, and like you said, the preseason games, I would imagine Trey's going to get a lot of juice, and maybe clearly he's improved his mechanics a little bit, but threw a bad pick today at practice. You never know. It's a fluid situation. I'm a believer that Sam's going to win the job because Kyle had already had that in his mind coming into the year. It's why they convinced Sam, who had other opportunities, to come to a place with like 10 quarterbacks. He didn't just randomly come.
Right.
So is Trey Lance, and it's not his fault he makes $9 million. That's his draft slot. But there's not going to be a team in the NFL that's going to have a $9 million third-string quarterback. But the 49ers have had all these quarterback injuries that they'll probably just roll with it, and he's a high-character guy, so they're not really worried about that. But it is a bizarre situation. It really is for a team that, let's face it, has kind of one goal in mind, and that's, to get to the big dance and win the thing. I mean, they're not Anthony Richardson's playing. They don't care if they're just going to try to figure it out, right? You see a lot of these young quarterbacks. That is not what the Niners are in. They're in win now mode and win big.
There are a lot of these young coaches, McVay and Shanahan among them. They kind of want you to do what they tell you to do. Like, they both love Kirk Cousins. McVay and Shanahan both love Kirk Cousins. Lamar Jackson's a great athlete. Josh Allen's a great athlete. I mean, you'd take Josh Allen.
Yeah.
But the takeaway is a lot of these young coaches, Andy Reid is different. Andy Reid wanted Michael Vick. Andy Reid wanted Mahomes. Andy wants playmakers. That's why he's the great coach. But a lot of these young coaches just want somebody, Bill Walsh had this, who can simply deliver on my play call. Sean Payton's a lot like that. Russell Wilson's going to be a challenge for Sean Payton.
Big time.
He's trying to mold Russell. Russell would rather go deep. Breeze didn't throw deep. Breeze was 18 yards and in. So the play design and the play call by Sean Payton was essential. Russell will run out of the play call.
Yeah.
He'll run out of the play design. So that's a really interesting situation. Sean Payton, McVay, Shanahan, they kind of like you to do what they say. And you know this. Whatever gift God gives you, a great singing voice, you're going to use it in the shower, in your car, in a chorus. If God gives you a great arm, Josh Allen, you're going to use it.
Yeah.
Favre, big interceptions. Namath, big interceptions. Bradshaw. And so I kind of think I think Stafford mostly does what Sean wants, but he drives Sean crazy with the picks, ad-libbing. And so I look at, I forget what the original question was, but I think
is Trey Lance as a third string quarterback? Is that even possible?
Yeah. He wasn't as athletic. I was told very early, they established he wasn't as athletic as they thought.
It was evident.
Right. But they were okay with that. So their takeaway, he was kind of a physical runner, not nimble and twitchy.
Yeah.
But I was told Kyle was okay with that. I don't need too much twitch. By the end of the first camp, they were like, man, we got a throwing issue. So what happens with Trey is not only isn't he athletic enough, but he doesn't give you the distribution excellence.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work. Now, Darnold is a little more athletic than Trey, can struggle with distribution. Purdy isn't that athletic, great at distribution. So you can, and they both love Kirk Cousins, McVay and Shanahan. So you can see the model here. A lot of these young coaches, John, you know this, you scout it. Some of these coaches want you to run their play. That's what they want.
Well, see, Andy is much more, it's weird, offensive linemen, when you think of them, tend to be just like conservative, tough guys. He's really more of a free spirit, let it flow, and it comes back. Yeah. He was taught in the early 80s at the BYU program that was well ahead of its time, throwing the ball all the time. And then his NFL stardom came with Brett Favre, right? The ultimate freelance gunslinger. So a lot of coaches, the Shanahan tree was all raised in, it's a lot of boot and play actions, dumping the ball off to a guy 5 feet in front of you. So now eventually it's the NFL. You have to hit a 3rd and 10, but there is a lot of 1st and 10 of a little flick to Debo or to Christian McCaffrey that if you put it at his feet, it's a disaster because that's an easy 13 yards. And that's where I think Purdy came in and immediately did that. And it was almost like they became BFFs immediately because that is what he's really looking for, right? Most quarterbacks in the NFL can throw the ball 50 yards, right? But that's not the majority of the game is not deep bombs. And that to me is the most fascinating part about all this quarterback. Like what makes Mahomes really special? Obviously he's instinctive and the physical attributes. The guy is very, very accurate when he has to be, and he's very, very football smart. So Andy's always said this about even when Tyreek Hill was on the team, is I could tell him to do whatever I needed to do and he'd pick it up like that. You know, we talk a lot about in football, all the physical characteristics and then all the schemes, but we don't talk enough about the intelligence because it's like teaching some of these guys, they can never get it. And that limits their potential in the sport because the game is so complex. And as the preseason now is a joke, right? But once the season comes in, you're putting in a new game plan every single week.
It's funny. This is a year, John, where I think some of the more interesting storylines are not on star quarterbacks. They're on potential busts. Justin Fields, Jordan Love. I'm totally fascinated with both. Now, I think Fields is so brilliantly athletic, he's going to make it.
Yeah.
They've given him, I think Mooney's a really good 2, DJ Moore a 1, Claypool inconsistent 3, Cole Kmet's a nice tight end, Robert Tonyan. O-line's not terrible. I think they found a left tackle a couple years ago in the draft. So he is so brilliantly athletic. You know, it's like when you were watching Steve Young when he was young, you were like, okay, he's not great in the pocket yet, but this shit's going to work.
Yeah.
He's just too athletic. Cam was like that. It's going to work to some degree. So Justin's going to work to some degree. But I have a very good source, very good in Green Bay, who says 3 years, they don't see any juice with Jordan Love. And it's weird. Usually I'm so geeked up to watch the great quarterbacks. I'm fascinated with Fields. I'm fascinated with Sam Darnold in San Francisco. I can't wait to watch Jordan Love play. My gut is, it's like, they always say a man can tell in 8 minutes if she's right for him, and it may take her 8 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah.
3 years in the building. I don't have a piece of video on Jordan Love. I mean, you were hearing Joe Burrow greatness week 3 in camp in Cincinnati. My guess is here, LaFleur will control him, but there's going to be no there with Jordan Love. It's just going to be a guy. That's my take.
I think we saw this when Brady left. Whenever there is a guy that you ultimately chose to get rid of, and that guy goes on to have success, I think Rodgers is going to have a fantastic season. I don't know if you've watched some of his press conferences. He feels like he's in the best mental space in a long, long time. I mean, he feels really good. I think he's going to be really good. And that element, even if it's we were ready to move on and they were right, like it was time for a divorce, you're still the guy replacing him, right? You don't want to be the guy replacing Nick Saban. Good luck, right? You want to be the guy that replaces that guy. And I just think Jordan Love, I think we're going to know, and you're always big on this, right, pretty quickly, especially with a guy that's been in the league for a while. I think in that first month, the pressure on him, especially if it starts slow, will be beyond immense, right? Because there are so many quarterbacks now, especially if you look at like CJ Stroud just looks okay and Bryce Young.
Yeah.
It happens so fast. The league has never been easier from a passing standpoint. And then when you factor in, well, this guy knows the offense. He's been sitting learning from a Hall of Famer, and the head coach has been sitting right next to him. Yeah, I think I find him fascinating. To me, Fields, just because anytime that you're a starting quarterback for a GM and a coach that did not draft you, like I've seen it firsthand, like they will move on. It's about your guy. It's not like that in other sports. Like if I just inherit Barry Bonds or LeBron James, who cares? In football, unless you're like Aaron Rodgers, everyone can be moved really quickly in football. And I do think it got weird last year, and a lot of it was Bill's fault because of who he made the offensive coordinator. But I think if Mac Jones, and we already talk about him like he's his best case is like Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk Cousins-ish. Well, that means his floor is really low. If he's just average, he could get everybody fired, right? It could just end the Belichick era.
Well, and also, if you look at Green Bay's schedule, there's some real daunting defenses later. You got to face the Steelers in November. Like that, you don't want to open with the Steelers. The Chargers defense the week after that. You've got the Giants defense later, Carolina's front. But if you really look early for Jordan Love, opens with the Bears defense. It was awful. Falcons defense, awful. Week 4, Lions defense, awful. Week 5, Raiders defense last year, outside of Max Crosby, awful. So those defenses may be better, John. You can't go from awful to great in a year. So my takeaway is, in those first 5 weeks, I'm not even looking at wins. If that kid can't get 300 yards passing a couple times, whatever the scoreboard is, you're going to know in the building, right? Like you've got to you could lose to Atlanta, but it better be 30-28, and they got the ball last.
I don't have the number in front of me, but I think off the top of my head, you know how they signed that because they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. They basically did like a 2-year, $11 million deal. We see these agents in the NFL when it comes to premium positions are so cutthroat. If you had any positive thought that this guy had a chance to be just a solid player, $11 million for 2 years at quarterback, like you would just say, let's play it out. Let's see what happens. But that to me is a very just kind of CYA. This could go really bad. And obviously, if you're the Packers, it's an easy one. The other thing is, if it goes poorly in terms of Jordan Love and he's not any good and they're just bad because their quarterback plays really shitty, they're actually pretty well equipped for a young quarterback. I mean, They got a lot of talent, a lot of defensive pieces, a lot of good young offensive pieces. If I was Caleb or Drake May, like Green Bay, great place to play football. It matters. They've had star quarterbacks. They got young players. They got a coach that knows how to coach offense. I actually think I'd rather go there than Arizona.
No, it's really interesting, John. If you look at, I said this the other day. So next year's college quarterback class, best in a 4 to 5 year window. Secondly, you don't have a bunch of old offensive pieces that could get very impatient, not want to stick around with a kid. Christian Watson, Dobbs, Dillon, the running back. They just drafted 2 tight ends. They've got some youth on the O-line. They're ready for a young quarterback, right? Like it's a young, energized group. The quarterback's going to listen to the same music, play with the same tech. This is 26 and under kids. Yeah. So it's not, you don't got a bunch of old guys that are like, who's this 22-year-old rookie? So also LaFleur, by and large, a young coach who sort of favors the run game. He would love to slowly grow a quarterback in. The advantage of sitting him 3 years, John, is everybody knows by Thanksgiving. My dad used to say, your employment will be based on rooms you don't sit in. By Thanksgiving, Mark Murphy, Brian Gutekunst, they're sitting in a room making all these decisions privately. 3 years of practice video, 10 games to Thanksgiving, everybody knows. So my takeaway is that's the advantage of not playing a quarterback. You get so many reps All I need to say is about 8 games of live bullets.
Yeah.
You give me 8 games. That's Brian Gutekunst, Mark Murphy. This is what they do for a living. So I think Green Bay, and also, remember this, John. This is a really good quarterback class. Many of the bad teams, Carolina, Houston, just drafted a quarterback. Right? So you're in a tiny window. We know Tampa's drafting a quarterback, and we know the Raiders are. Yeah. That's not arguable. Green Bay could be, Indy just got a quarterback. Green Bay could be one of like 4 teams that absolutely needs a quarterback. So, John, they wouldn't, even if they won 5 games and had the 8th pick. Harrison is the best receiver since Moss. Somebody's taken him.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a tackle at Penn State that's elite.
Off the charts. So it's not like, let's just keep moving back. Harrison, how many teams in the league would take Randy Moss in his prime today? Yeah. So Caleb, Drake May, and Harrison are your first 3. The draft starts at 4, and and I would say the Penn State O-lineman's probably a lock for top 4.
Yeah.
So if you finish with the 5th best record, or you're 5 or 6 in the draft, you don't have to give anything up. You're going to get a quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. The other big story, I don't know if you saw J.K. Dobbins, the running back for the Ravens, who's mad, wants a contract. Obviously, this Jonathan Taylor situation. I hadn't thought of this, but I was on Gottlieb's radio show, and he made a good point. It's clearly that phone call that was led by a bunch of guys that had already been paid, got everyone kind of amped up. And a message went out as we're all getting screwed, even though everyone that's talking is making $12 to $15 million. And some of the other guys,
right,
start kind of. Jonathan Taylor went on record, I think late April, said, hey, listen, I'm glad to be here. This will get figured out. I'm not worried. He's always been known, high character guy. Then gets into camp and he's double middle fingers. He's pissed off. J.K. Dobbins, who played 8 games, ran for 500 yards, refusing to practice right now. Sometimes you start listening to people who are above your pay grade with some of their ideas, and it seeps down, can put you in a bad mental spot. I don't care what industry you're in. And I think if you look back on that phone call, it's going to have some negative ramble. Christian McCaffrey can do whatever he wants. Derrick Henry. There are other guys that aren't quite on that level. And I think when you start thinking like other people that you shouldn't be thinking like that yet, can just create some chaos. And this is not the NBA where they're just going to capitulate to your demands. I think these guys are realizing it really quick.
Right. Well, the one team that's interesting is the Colts. So there's a number that Warren Sharp puts out that quarterbacks, by and large, have gobbled up about 15 to 20% of the running back rush yards in the last decade. Well, Anthony Richardson could gobble up 25 to 30%. People are projecting him as like Justin Fields, but more athletic.
Yeah.
So
he's bigger.
So the Colt, yeah. So if he gobbles up 30% of Jonathan Taylor's yards, he rushes for 950 yards, 7 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts is getting 10 plus touchdowns.
Yeah.
Lamar's getting 1,000 yards. Josh Allen getting 800. And Josh Allen's a great pocket guy now. So let's say Anthony Richardson, only 1 year starting in college, gonna be kind of raw. Shane Steichen likes athletic quarterbacks. He's gonna lean into running for 2 years. So the Colts say to themselves, we don't need an A running back. What we need is a better corner and another receiver or tight end. Do the Colts call the Patriots, who have a surplus of DBs, and say, we'll give you Taylor. You don't have a damn playmaker in your roster.
No. You
give us Stevenson, who's a B running back, and your 2 or 3 corner. So I could see Indy saying, listen,
and a pick, maybe.
Give us a 5th round pick, your 3 corner, and your B back. We'll give you Taylor. New England has no playmakers. John, Mac Jones is not a playmaker.
No.
Devontae Parker's not. Hunter Henry's not. Essentially, New England can only score with 11 play drives.
Yeah. Juju's a slot wide receiver.
So Jonathan Taylor, they have no cleanup hitter. Shit, they don't have a 3 hitter. They don't have anybody in the 3 hole. So to me, if I'm the Colts, I'd call New England and say, give us your number 2 or 3 corner, a pick, and we'll give you our B back. And it sounds, like, ooh, Belichick wouldn't get worked. Belichick's trying to keep his job. In a division where they can't stop Josh Allen, they won't stop Aaron Rodgers, and Mike McDaniel and Tua have had Belichick's number. They got to go get a playmaker, and nobody's given up a star receiver. The only position in the league where you can have a playmaker star and they'll give it to you is running back. I would get Jonathan Taylor tomorrow if I was New England. The one thing they have, and they always have under Belichick, they always have an extra corner. They always have an extra safety. Bill's the best DB coach in league history.
I'm in total agreement there. This gets back to the owner situation too, of just they create a little chaos when they talk, and a lot of these owners now know that nothing good comes out of it. And Jerry and Irsay, especially Irsay, he's pretty mouthy, and but you got to come. You can't let your rookie coach and your rookie raw quarterback. You don't want them in chaos, right? You got to figure out this situation. You got to figure out fast.
So let's wrap it up. So week 1 surprise. So here's my week 1 upset. The Jaguars are heavy favorites, and they have struggled through the years against the Colts. And they're coming in like a big 4-point favorite, 5-point. Okay. So they go indoors. They have no idea what they're getting from Anthony Richardson. They have no idea what they're getting with Shane Steichen, but we know Steichen did this immediately with Justin Fields. He was ready to play. So you've got a Colts team that won't be great, but bad teams don't know they're bad until about week 5. Yeah. You've got a new coach, new system that works quickly with young quarterbacks, and Anthony Richardson is so hypermobile. It's going to look like Lamar in his first 12 NFL games. You're not going to know what to do. I think the Colts, I think the Jags are going to end up with 12 to 13 wins. I think they're going to get caught flat-footed in week 1. There's going to be a holy blank moment in week 1. It's happened every year of my life. Give me a week 1 that you look at and think, oh, brother, Dallas Giants, Eagles, Patriots. What do you see?
Really quick on the Jags, I talked to a buddy that's on that staff, and he said Calvin Ridley, holy moly, looks fantastic. Their offense has a chance. If their defense is just okay, their offense could be lights out. I mean, we're talking top 5 or 6 in the league. So I think big picture, I'm a big Jags believer. The 49ers have started slow. Just under Kyle Shanahan. They've usually had to get rolling the second half of seasons in basically every season but the year that they went to the Super Bowl. But the last couple, they have not started fast. Last year, they didn't. They lost week 1 on the road to Chicago, who had the number 1 overall draft pick. This year, they play Pittsburgh. And, Pittsburgh easily finished this last stretch of the season playing as well as anyone. They obviously missed the playoffs, but it was because they, started with Mitch Trubisky. By the end, their rookie quarterback was leading game-winning drives. Now they have a lot of confidence. TJ Watt is healthy. I think they kind of have a true identity. To me, Kenny Pickett and Mac Jones are kind of in the same world. Kenny Pickett's a little bit better athlete, but the Steelers are much more equipped to handle a guy like him than Bill because they got playmakers. They know what the guy is. They have consistency with their coordinators. I think that's a weird spot for 49ers week 1, who are favored on the road with Brock Purdy coming back from this arm injury. He's ahead of schedule. He's able to throw pretty much full go in practice right now. But I could see the Niners, winning 13 games and losing that game. And I think a lot of people are going to – you get the Steelers at a home underdog week 1. I mean, that place is going to be going nuts. Brock Purdy, we can't give him the Steve Young, Joe Montana treatment just yet on the road week 1 against good teams.
The other thing is, what's Tomlin's track record?
Excellent underdog.
He's a great – oh, my God. He's the best underdog coach in the league. He's a terrible favorites coach. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is like Pete Carroll. He's the great motivator. Yeah. It's hard to motivate when you're a 13-point favorite over the Bengals 8 years ago. He is a home – remember a couple years ago, they go into Buffalo and kick the you-know-what out of the Bills. We all thought the Bills were going to win 15 games, and they went in there, blocked a punt. Josh Allen couldn't move the ball. Watch Pittsburgh play their arse off in that game.
Well, it's so easy for them, from Cam Hayward to TJ Watt to Minka. We've played everyone from Peyton to Tom Brady to Rodgers for a decade here. And Brock Purdy is just going to get treated like them, because that's that type number. Now, listen, it's a Kyle Shanahan number, not a Brock Purdy number. But I just think the Niners, just when you look at their history, slow starts, and that's just a tough opponent. Like this is not playing some 4-win team week 1. So I got that one circled. Just take the points right now. I love that bet.